Chapter 1. The Last Drop. The bitter winter of 1864 had wrapped the Tennessee mountains in a shroud of white. Snow crunched beneath Sheriff Elijah Hobbs's boots as he trudged up the narrow path leading to the Sutton homestead. The isolated cabin sat nestled against the mountainside, smoke curling from its chimney like a beckoning finger. "Sheriff's here," called Deputy Wilkes from behind, his breath fogging in the frigid air. "What business we got with these mountain folk, anyway?" Elijah adjusted his coat against the biting wind. 3 dead men in Oak Ridge, all drank Sutton whiskey before they died. That's what business. The Sutton brothers, Jedediah and Ezekiel, were known throughout 4 counties for their corn whiskey. It wasn't the strongest or the smoothest, but it was affordable and plentiful, a rare commodity during these war-torn times when the Union and Confederate armies had stripped the countryside bare. As they approached the cabin door, Elijah noticed unusual tracks in the snow, a heavy drag mark leading toward the woodshed behind the main house. The hair on the back of his neck prickled. "Anybody home?" Elijah called, rapping his knuckles against the rough-hewn door. The door creaked open to reveal Jedediah Sutton, a gaunt man with eyes the color of creek water after a storm. "Sheriff," he nodded, expression unreadable. "What brings you up the mountain in this weather?" "Need a word with you and your brother about your whiskey, Jed." A flicker of something fear crossed Jedediah's face before his features settled back into their customary stoicism. "Zeke ain't here. Went hunting 2 days back." "When's he due back?" "Should have been yesterday." Jedediah opened the door wider. "Come in before you freeze." The cabin's interior was unexpectedly orderly. A pot of something savory bubbled over the hearth fire, and strings of dried herbs hung from the rafters. Elijah noted a table with various glass bottles, powders, and plant matter arranged meticulously. "Been making medicines?" Elijah asked, gesturing toward the table. "Just remedies. Folk can't afford doctors these days." Deputy Wilkes wandered toward the table, picking up a small bottle filled with dark liquid. "Is your whiskey, Sutton?" Jedediah moved with surprising speed for his age, snatching the bottle from Wilkes' hand. "That ain't for drinking." Elijah observed the interaction carefully. 3 men died in Oak Ridge this week. All had your whiskey in their possession." "My whiskey don't kill nobody," Jedediah replied sharply. "Lest they drink too much of it." "These men didn't drink themselves to death. They were poisoned." Elijah watched Jedediah's reaction carefully. "And you've got knowledge of plants and such from the looks of it." Jedediah's weathered hands trembled slightly. "I heal with plants. Don't kill with them." A sudden noise from outside, the sound of wood splitting, drew their attention. Jedediah's eyes darted to the window. "Thought you said your brother wasn't home," Elijah said, hand moving to his pistol. "Must be back early," Jedediah muttered, but the tension in his shoulders told a different story. Elijah nodded to Wilkes, who moved toward the door. "Mind if we say hello to Ezekiel?" Before Jedediah could answer, Wilkes had already stepped outside. Elijah kept his eyes fixed on the older man, whose face had gone ashen. "Sheriff," Wilkes' voice cracked with urgency, "you need to see this." Elijah backed toward the door, never taking his eyes off Jedediah. Outside, he found Wilkes standing by the woodshed, pointing at the snow. The drag marks Elijah had noticed earlier led directly to the shed door, which hung slightly ajar. Dark stains that couldn't be mistaken for anything but blood marred the white snow. "Jedediah," Elijah called, drawing his pistol. "What's in that shed?" But Jedediah Sutton had disappeared into the depths of the cabin, leaving only the echo of the slamming door behind him. Chapter 2. Blood in the snow. Elijah signaled Wilkes to cover the cabin's front while he approached the woodshed. The door groaned as he pushed it open with his pistol barrel. The bitter tong of blood assaulted his nostrils before his eyes adjusted to the dimness. There, sprawled atop a pile of split logs, lay a man's body. His throat had been cut so deeply that the head lolled at an unnatural angle. The frozen blood had crystallized into macabre patterns across his chest. "It's Ezekiel Sutton," Elijah muttered, recognizing the younger brother despite the ghastly wound. "Been dead at least a day." A crash from the cabin snapped Elijah's attention back to the house. Through the window, he glimpsed Jedediah frantically gathering items from his workbench, stuffing them into a satchel. "Jedediah Sutton!" Elijah shouted, striding toward the cabin. "Stop right there!" The old man's eyes met Elijah's through the glass while desperate like a cornered animal. Then Jedediah lunged for something under his bed. "Gun!" Wilkes yelled, diving for cover as the window exploded in a shower of glass and splinters. Elijah pressed himself against the cabin wall, heart hammering. "Jedediah, there's nowhere to run. Put down the weapon and come out." Another shot answered him, splintering the doorframe where Elijah's head had been moments before. "He's killed his own brother, Sheriff," Wilkes called from behind an overturned water barrel. "He'll kill us too if he gets the chance." Elijah weighed their options. The cabin had only two exits, the front door and a small rear window. With Wilkes covering the front, Elijah crept around the side, boots silent in the deep snow. The rear window was slightly ajar, tendrils of smoke escaping from the gap. As Elijah neared, the acrid smell of burning paper filled his nostrils. Jedediah was destroying evidence. Steeling himself, Elijah lunged forward and crashed through the window, landing in a roll on the cabin floor. Smoke clouded the room, stinging his eyes. Through the haze, he made out Jedediah's form hunched over the hearth, feeding papers and small cloth bags to the flames. "Stop," Elijah commanded, training his pistol on the old man's back. Jedediah turned slowly, revealing the shotgun clutched in his gnarled hands. His eyes, now red-rimmed from smoke or perhaps tears, held a strange resignation. "You don't understand what you've found here, Sheriff," Jedediah rasped. "Best you leave it buried. Your brother's dead, 3 men in Oak Ridge poisoned. I'm taking you in, Jed." A bitter laugh escaped Jedediah's lips. Zeke had it coming, and those men in Oak Ridge, he shook his head. They weren't innocent either. That's for a judge to decide, Elijah replied, keeping his voice steady despite the shotgun pointed at his chest. "Lower your weapon." For a moment that stretched like molasses in January, neither man moved. Then, with surprising swiftness, Jedediah swung the shotgun toward the window where Wilkes was now appearing. Elijah's pistol barked once, twice. Jedediah staggered, the shotgun discharging harmlessly into the ceiling. He collapsed against the hearth, blood blooming across his shirt front. As Wilkes rushed in, Elijah knelt beside the dying man. "Why, Jed? Why kill your own brother? Why poison those men?" Jedediah's lips moved, blood bubbling at the corners. "Look!" "In the cellar," he whispered. "Under the floorboards. See what they made us do." His eyes fixed on something beyond Elijah, and with a rattling sigh, Jedediah Sutton departed for whatever judgment awaited him. Wilkes surveyed the scene, kicking aside a bottle that had rolled from Jedediah's satchel. "What do you reckon he meant by that, Sheriff?" Elijah holstered his pistol, a sense of unease settling over him like the mountain mist. "I don't know, but I aim to find out." He moved toward the rough plank flooring near the hearth, searching for signs of a cellar door. Whatever secrets the Sutton brothers had kept, they would remain buried no longer. Chapter 3. What lies beneath the cellar door was cleverly concealed beneath a worn rug. Its iron ring handle tucked into a shallow groove in the floor. Elijah pulled it open to reveal a yawning darkness below. "I'll fetch a lantern," Wilkes offered, clearly relieved to postpone descending into the unknown. Elijah nodded, using the moment to examine the cabin more thoroughly. Jedediah's body lay where he had fallen, blood seeping into the floorboards. On the workbench, several bottles remained untouched by the fire. Elijah carefully wrapped one in a handkerchief and pocketed it. "Evidence." Wilkes returned with a sputtering oil lantern. "You want me to go down with you, Sheriff?" "Stay here," Elijah replied. "Keep an eye on things. And Wilkes, don't touch anything." The wooden steps creaked ominously as Elijah descended into the cellar. The lantern light cast grotesque shadows on the earthen walls, revealing a space larger than he had anticipated. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth, herbs, and something else, a sickly sweet odor that made his stomach turn. Shelves lined one wall, laden with jars of preserved fruits, vegetables, and less identifiable substances. Bundles of dried plants hung from the low ceiling. But it was what occupied the center of the cellar that stopped Elijah cold. A large wooden table, its surface stained dark, dominated the space. Leather straps were affixed to each corner. Beside it stood a smaller table bearing an assortment of knives, saws, and other implements that had no place in a simple mountain cabin. Elijah had seen similar arrangements only once before in a field hospital during his brief service in the early days of the war. "Dear God," he murmured, raising the lantern higher. The far corner of the cellar contained a crude cage fashioned from iron bars set into the wall. Inside, a threadbare pallet and a chamber pot suggested recent occupation. Scratches marked the earthen floor as if someone had been counting days or digging desperately with bare hands. Elijah turned his attention to the area Jedediah had mentioned, beneath the floorboards. Unlike the main cabin, the cellar floor was primarily packed earth, but a section near the wall was covered with wooden planks. Several appeared newer than the rest. Setting the lantern down, Elijah worked his knife between two boards, levering one up. The wood came away with surprising ease, revealing a small space beneath. Inside lay an oilskin packet. Elijah extracted it carefully and unwrapped the protective covering. Inside were papers, letters from the look of them, and a leather-bound journal. He opened the journal first, holding it close to the lantern light. The neat, cramped handwriting filled page after page with dates, names, and detailed notes. As Elijah scanned the contents, the horror of what the Sutton brothers had been involved in became clear. Sheriff, Wilkes called from the top of the stairs. "Everything all right down there?" "Found something," Elijah replied, his voice hollow. "Bring another lantern. There's more to see here." When Wilkes joined him, Elijah had already removed several more floorboards, revealing a shallow pit containing cloth-wrapped bundles. The distinctive shape of human bones was visible through the deteriorating fabric. "Lord have mercy," Wilkes breathed, crossing himself. "How many are there?" "At least 5, from what I can tell," Elijah said grimly. "And according to this journal, there may be others buried around the property." He handed Wilkes the journal, pointing to a particularly damning passage. April 18th, 1863. Subject expired during procedure. E. Says too much foxglove in the initial draft. Must adjust formula for next attempt. Buried remains in the north clearing. They were experimenting on people, Wilkes said, his face ashen. But why? What were they trying to do? Elijah held up one of the letters. "This might explain it. It's from someone signing only as the colonel. Listen to this. Your progress is commendable, but the Confederacy requires results, not excuses. The battlefield surgeons need a method to keep wounded men alive longer during transport. Your expertise with local botanicals places you in a unique position to serve our glorious cause. Remember our agreement, your continued freedom in exchange for your services. Failure will result in the exposure of your previous ... indiscretions." Wilkes shook his head in disbelief. They were being blackmailed into developing some kind of medicine for the Confederate Army. And they were kidnapping people to experiment on. "That appears to be the case," Elijah confirmed, examining another letter. "Though from Jedediah's journal entries, it seems they were targeting specific individuals, deserters, Union sympathizers, and others they could make disappear without raising too many questions." "And the men in Oak Ridge? The ones poisoned by the whiskey?" Elijah flipped through more journal pages. Here Jedediah wrote about them. They were Confederate agents sent to check on the Sutton's progress. He must have discovered they planned to take him and Ezekiel to Richmond for a military tribunal. The brothers had been stalling for months, and the Confederacy was losing patience, so he poisoned them, Wilkes concluded. But why kill his brother? Elijah carefully refolded the papers. Last entry suggests Ezekiel wanted to surrender to Union forces, confess everything. Jedediah feared what would happen to them both. The two men stood in silence, absorbing the magnitude of what they had uncovered. Finally, Elijah spoke. "We need to document everything, then contact the Union commander at Knoxville. This goes beyond a simple murder case." As they climbed back to the main cabin, Elijah couldn't shake a nagging thought. "Wilkes, check Jedediah's body again. I want to make sure he's not carrying any of the papers." While Wilkes examined the corpse, Elijah returned to the workbench, studying the remaining bottles and powders. One small vial contained a clear liquid that smelled faintly of almonds prussic acid, if his limited knowledge of poisons was correct. Sheriff Wilkes called, his voice strained. "You'd better see this." Elijah turned to find the deputy holding a sealed envelope he'd extracted from Jedediah's inner coat pocket. The address on the front sent a chill down Elijah's spine. Sheriff Elijah Hobbs. Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Chapter 4. A letter for the sheriff. Elijah stared at his name scrawled in Jedediah Sutton's precise handwriting. With steady hands that belied his inner turmoil, he broke the wax seal and unfolded the letter inside. "Read it aloud," Wilkes urged, hovering nearby. Clearing his throat, Elijah began. "Sheriff Hobbs, if you are reading this, then I have departed this world, likely by your hand. I harbor no ill will toward you for this. Indeed, I welcome the release from the burden I have carried these past years. By now you will have discovered our shameful work in the cellar. What began as a patriotic endeavor developing medicines to aid our Confederate wounded descended into something monstrous. We became prisoners of our own creation, forced to test increasingly deadly concoctions on unwilling subjects. I must clarify one matter. The men who died in Oak Ridge were not innocent agents. They were the architects of our nightmare, Colonel Thaddeus Brenner and his 2 associates. They arrived last week not to check our progress, but to eliminate us as liabilities. The war is turning against the Confederacy, and they are erasing evidence of their less savory operations. Brenner revealed their intentions while drinking our whiskey, unaware that I had recognized him despite his false name. The poison was already in his cup, a mercy compared to what they had authorized us to do to others. As for my brother Ezekiel, you surely found his body in the woodshed. What you cannot know is that it was an act of mercy. When Brenner's associates failed to return to their rendezvous point, reinforcements were dispatched to investigate. They captured Ezekiel while he was checking our snares. They tortured him, demanding to know if we had betrayed them. By the time I found him, he begged for death. I tell you these things not to absolve myself of guilt, but to warn you. More of Brenner's men will come. They will seek the formulas we developed and eliminate anyone with knowledge of their existence. This includes you, Sheriff. In the root cellar behind the smokehouse, you will find a cache of documents detailing the entire operation, including names of officials involved. Use this information wisely. The blood of 17 souls stains my hands. I go now to whatever judgment awaits me, but I fear my brother and I are beyond redemption. With regret, Jedediah Sutton, Elijah lowered the letter, meeting Wilkes' stunned gaze. 17 people, Wilkes whispered, and Confederate officials orchestrating it all. If this is true, Elijah said slowly, we need to find that cache of documents before anyone else does. A sudden noise outside. The distant crunch of multiple footsteps in snow sent both men reaching for their weapons. How many? Elijah whispered, moving to the window. Wilkes peered through a crack in the shutters. At least 6 coming up the trail. Armed, Brenner's men, Elijah muttered. We need to move quickly. They worked with desperate efficiency, gathering Jedediah's journal, the letters, and several bottles from the workbench. Elijah led the way to the back door. The smokehouse is 30 yards behind the cabin, he said, checking his pistol. We'll have to make a run for it. Ready? Wilkes nodded grimly, clutching the evidence to his chest. They burst through the door into the blinding whiteness of the snow-covered yard. Gunfire erupted immediately. The approaching men had spotted them. Bullets thudded into the wooden cabin wall as Elijah and Wilkes zigzagged toward the small smokehouse visible through the swirling snow. A cry of pain told Elijah that Wilkes had been hit, but the deputy kept moving, trailing a line of crimson droplets across the pristine snow. They reached the smokehouse, slamming the door behind them just as another volley of bullets splintered the wood. How bad? Elijah asked, examining Wilkes' bloody shoulder. Just grazed me, Wilkes grunted. Find the documents. The smokehouse was small, primarily occupied by hanging haunches of venison. Elijah located the trapdoor to the root cellar quickly, a simple wooden hatch in the dirt floor. He pulled it open to reveal a ladder descending into darkness. Go, Wilkes urged, positioning himself by the door with his pistol ready. I'll hold them off as long as I can. Elijah hesitated only briefly before descending. The root cellar was little more than a hole in the ground, shelves laden with preserved vegetables and fruits lining the walls. In the back corner, partially buried beneath a pile of turnips, sat a metal strongbox. The box was locked, but a well-placed strike with a rock broke the mechanism. Inside, Elijah found exactly what Jedediah had promised, detailed records of the entire operation, including military orders bearing official seals, lists of subjects acquired for experimentation, and formulas developed through their gruesome work. Most damning of all was a letter signed by 3 Confederate generals authorizing the project and establishing a chain of command that reached into the highest levels of the Confederate government. Gunfire erupted above, followed by Wilkes' shout of defiance. Elijah gathered the papers and climbed back up the ladder. He emerged to find Wilkes crouched by the door, blood now soaking his entire left side. They're surrounding us, Wilkes gasped. Too many to fight. Elijah's mind raced. The smokehouse offered no viable defense. It would become their tomb if they remained. But outside waited men determined to silence them permanently. His gaze fell on a small barrel in the corner labeled coal oil. An idea formed. Desperate, dangerous, but their only chance. We need a diversion, he told Wilkes, dragging the barrel to the center of the smokehouse. He pried off the lid, the pungent odor of lamp oil filling the small space. When I give the signal, head for the trees behind us. Don't stop. Don't look back. Get these documents to Union lines. What about you? Wilkes asked, already knowing the answer. Elijah handed him the strongbox. I'll be right behind you. Both men knew it was a lie, but neither acknowledged it. Elijah soaked a length of twine in the oil, creating a crude fuse that led from the barrel to the door. Ready? He asked, positioning himself by the rear wall, which was little more than thin wooden slats. Wilkes nodded, gripping the precious documents. Elijah struck a match, lighting the fuse. Now, he hurled himself against the rear wall, the weathered wood giving way under his weight. Wilkes followed, both men tumbling into the snow just as the oil ignited with a dull hump. Flames engulfed the smokehouse, the heat intense even several yards away. Shouts of confusion came from the front as Brenner's men reacted to the sudden inferno. Elijah pushed Wilkes toward the tree line. Go, I'll draw their fire. Without waiting for a response, Elijah sprinted in the opposite direction, firing his pistol into the air. The ruse worked. Bullets kicked up snow around him as the attackers concentrated their attention on the fleeing sheriff. Elijah ducked behind a woodpile, watching with satisfaction as Wilkes disappeared into the forest, the evidence clutched to his chest. Quote, Then he turned to face the approaching men, pistol raised. He would not survive this day, that much was certain. But the truth about what had happened at the Sutton cabin would not die with him. Chapter 5. The pursuit, the bitter cold, bit into Wilkes' flesh as he crashed through the underbrush, each ragged breath sending daggers of pain through his wounded shoulder. Behind him, gunshots echoed through the forest Eli, making his last stand. The deputy clutched the metal box of documents tighter against his chest, pushing his exhausted body onward. He had no illusions about the sheriff's fate. Elijah Hobbs had sacrificed himself to ensure this evidence reached the proper authorities. Wilkes would not let that sacrifice be in vain. The forest grew denser as he descended the mountain's eastern slope. Pine branches whipped at his face, leaving stinging welts, but he dared not slow his pace. Brenner's men would realize the deception soon enough, and then they would come for him, after what seemed like hours but couldn't have been more than 40 minutes. Wilkes collapsed against a fallen oak, his lungs burning. Blood had soaked through his coat and frozen in the bitter air, creating a grotesque armor over his wound. He needed to tend it or risk bleeding out before reaching help. With trembling fingers, he unwound his wool scarf and packed it against the bullet graze, using his belt to secure the makeshift bandage. It wasn't proper doctoring, but it might keep him alive long enough to complete his mission. As he worked, Wilkes considered his options. Oak Ridge lay 15 miles to the south, too far in his condition and likely watched by Brenner's associates. The Union encampment at Knoxville was 30 miles east, an impossible journey on foot in winter. His best hope lay in reaching the Winston homestead, about 5 miles northeast. Old Man Winston was no friend to the Confederacy after his eldest son had been executed as a deserter. He might provide shelter and perhaps transportation toward Union lines. Decision made, Wilkes pushed himself upright and oriented, using the weak winter sun filtering through the clouds, northeast, toward safety. He had covered perhaps 2 miles when he heard them, the distant baying of hounds. Brenner's men had brought tracking dogs. The sound sent a wave of despair through Wilkes, quickly replaced by grim determination. He couldn't outrun dogs, not in his condition. He needed to outthink them. Ahead, a shallow stream cut through the forest floor. Wilkes waded into the frigid water, gasping as it soaked his boots and trousers. He followed the stream for several hundred yards before clambering out on a rocky outcropping that would hold no scent. From there, he doubled back parallel to his original path before veering northeast once more. It wouldn't fool the trackers for long, but it might buy precious time. The light was fading when Wilkes finally glimpsed smoke rising from a chimney in the distance, the Winston farm. He stumbled the last quarter mile, the metal box clutched to his chest like a talisman. He had nearly reached the edge of the cleared fields when a voice called from behind him. "That's far enough, deputy." Wilkes froze, then slowly turned to face a tall figure emerging from the shadows of the pines. The man wore a Confederate cavalry uniform with lieutenant's insignia, but it was the revolver aimed at Wilkes' chest that commanded attention. Lieutenant Blackwood. Wilkes recognized the man from previous encounters in Oak Ridge. "You're working with Brenner." Colonel Brenner, Blackwood corrected mildly, was a patriot serving the Confederacy by any means necessary. "You're carrying state secrets, Deputy Wilkes." "Hand over that box." Wilkes tightened his grip on the evidence. "These documents detail war crimes. Innocent people tortured and killed. This isn't about state secrets, about murder. War makes monsters of us all," Blackwood replied, stepping closer. "The box, deputy, now. And then you'll let me go?" Wilkes asked, though he already knew the answer. A thin smile crossed Blackwood's face. "Of course." Wilkes assessed his options. His pistol was empty, spent during their escape from the cabin. He was wounded, exhausted, and outmatched. But the Winston farm lay just beyond the tree line. If he could create a distraction— "All right," Wilkes said, slowly lowering the box to the snow. "No need for more bloodshed." As Blackwood's attention flickered to the box, Wilkes lunged forward with unexpected speed, driving his shoulder into the lieutenant's midsection. Both men crashed to the ground, the revolver discharging harmlessly into the air. They grappled in the snow, Blackwood's superior strength gradually overpowering the wounded deputy. The lieutenant's hands closed around Wilkes' throat, squeezing with methodical pressure. Darkness crept into the edges of Wilkes' vision as he desperately groped in the snow for a weapon, anything to loosen the deadly grip. His fingers closed around a rock, and with his remaining strength he brought it crashing against Blackwood's temple. The pressure on his throat disappeared as the lieutenant slumped sideways. Wilkes rolled away, coughing and retching, precious air flooding back into his lungs. Blackwood lay motionless, blood staining the snow beneath his head. Whether dead or merely unconscious, Wilkes couldn't tell, nor did he stay to find out. He snatched up the box and the lieutenant's revolver and staggered toward the Winston farm. The gunshot had been heard. Lanterns bobbed in the gathering darkness as figures moved from the farmhouse toward the forest edge. Wilkes raised a hand in greeting, summoning his voice. "Winston, it's Deputy Wilkes from Oak Ridge. I need help." The approaching figures hesitated, then moved forward with greater urgency. As they drew closer, Wilkes recognized Jeremiah Winston, the family patriarch, leading two younger men with rifles at the ready. "Deputy? What in tarnation are you doing out here? And bleeding by the looks of it." Wilkes swayed, sudden lightheadedness threatening to topple him. "Sheriff Hobbs is dead. Confederate agents, after these documents, need to get them to Union command." He thrust the box toward Winston as his knees buckled. The last thing he saw before consciousness fled was the old man's weathered hands closing protectively around the evidence of the Sutton brothers' terrible secret. Chapter 6. Shadows at dusk. Charlotte Hobbs stood on the porch of her modest Oak Ridge home, watching the road with growing apprehension. Elijah had been gone 3 days, far longer than the quick ride up the mountain he had promised when departing to investigate the Sutton brothers. Inside, her 8-year-old son Thomas played with carved wooden soldiers, blissfully unaware of his mother's concern. Charlotte's hand moved unconsciously to the small revolver hidden in the pocket of her apron, a precaution Elijah had insisted upon when he became sheriff 4 years earlier. "A lawman makes enemies," he had told her. "I need to know you can protect yourself and Thomas if necessary." Charlotte had learned to shoot with surprising proficiency, though she prayed daily she would never need to use the skill. As twilight descended over the valley, her anxiety peaked. She was about to call Thomas inside for supper when the distant sound of hoofbeats drew her attention back to the road. A rider approached, not at the leisurely pace of a routine return, but with the urgency of someone bearing news. Charlotte recognized Jeremiah Winston's eldest surviving son, Caleb, as he pulled his lathered horse to a stop before her gate. His grim expression told her everything before he spoke a word. "Mrs. Hobbs," he began, removing his hat, "I bring news of the sheriff." She steeled herself, hands gripping the porch railing. "Tell me." "He's dead, ma'am. Killed by Confederate agents at the Sutton place." Caleb's voice was gentle but direct. "Deputy Wilkes made it to our farm with evidence of terrible doings up there. Pa's taken him in the documents toward Union lines." Charlotte stood perfectly still, absorbing the blow. She had prepared herself for this possibility from the moment Elijah pinned on the sheriff's star. Yet the reality struck with a force that nearly drove her to her knees. "The men who killed him?" she asked, her voice remarkably steady. "Still out there, ma'am. Pa sent me to warn you they might come here looking for anything the sheriff might have left behind." Charlotte nodded, her mind working with cold precision despite her grief. "You've ridden hard, Caleb. Come in and take some food while I gather what we need." Inside, she moved with practiced efficiency, packing essential supplies while Caleb wolfed down bread and cold ham. Thomas watched with wide eyes as his mother strapped on Elijah's spare gun belt. "Are we going on an adventure, Mama?" he asked. Charlotte knelt beside him, brushing back his dark hair so like his father's. "Yes, sweetheart. We're going to stay with the Winstons for a while. It'll be like a holiday." As she spoke, a sound from the front yard froze her blood. Multiple horses approaching, men's voices calling orders. Charlotte peered through the curtains to see 5 riders dismounting, led by a man in a Confederate captain's uniform. "Back door," she whispered to Caleb. "Now." The young man nodded, understanding immediately. He swept Thomas into his arms while Charlotte grabbed their packs and Elijah's old hunting rifle from above the mantel. They slipped out the kitchen door into the gathering darkness just as pounding began on the front entrance. Instead of heading directly for the woods behind the house, Charlotte led them to the small stable where her mare and Thomas's pony were kept. "Won't they hear the horses?" Caleb whispered as Charlotte swiftly saddled her mount. "They'll hear us regardless," she replied grimly. "But we'll move faster on horseback than on foot." The sound of splintering wood told them the front door had given way. Charlotte lifted Thomas onto her saddle, then handed the boy to Caleb while she untied the other horses in the stable and slapped their rumps, sending them galloping in different directions. "Confusion," she explained, mounting up behind Thomas. "Let's go." They rode hard for the tree line, Charlotte clinging to her son with one arm while the other held the rifle at the ready. Behind them, shouts of alarm rose from the house as their escape was discovered. A shot rang out, the bullet whizzing past Charlotte's ear close enough that she felt its passage. Without breaking stride, she twisted in the saddle, raised the rifle, and fired at the shadowy figure standing in her doorway. The man dropped, whether hit or merely diving for cover she couldn't tell. "Mrs. Hobbs," Caleb called as they entered the forest. "You're full of surprises." "Elijah taught me more than just shooting," she replied grimly. "He showed me every trail and hiding place in these mountains." Those men don't stand a chance of finding us once we reach the high country. They rode through the night, following game trails that wound ever higher into the Tennessee mountains. Thomas eventually dozed against his mother's chest, lulled by the rhythmic movement of the horse. Charlotte remained vigilant, grief locked away for now beneath the imperative of survival. Near dawn, they reached a small hunting cabin Elijah had maintained as a retreat and as a potential sanctuary should trouble ever come to Oak Ridge. It was well hidden in a stand of ancient pines, visible only when one stood directly before it. "We'll rest here," Charlotte decided, dismounting carefully with the sleeping Thomas. "They won't find this place easily." Caleb helped settle Thomas on a rough-hewn bunk inside, while Charlotte secured the horses in a small lean-to behind the cabin. The interior was sparse, but prepared for emergency use: dry firewood stacked neatly, preserved foods in a locked chest, and several blankets folded on a shelf. "Your husband planned well," Caleb observed as Charlotte kindled a small fire in the stone hearth. "Elijah believed in preparing for the worst while hoping for the best," she replied, her voice catching slightly on her husband's name. She busied herself with heating water for coffee, refusing to surrender to grief while danger still loomed. As morning light filtered through the cabin's single window, Charlotte retrieved a small leather journal from her Pakileja's personal record, separate from his official sheriff's log. "Caleb, what exactly did Deputy Wilkes bring to your father?" she asked, leafing through the journal. "A metal box full of papers. Said it was evidence of terrible things the Sutton brothers had been doing for the Confederacy. Experiments on people," he said. 17 dead, at least." Charlotte's fingers froze on a page dated 3 weeks earlier. Elijah had written, "Suspicious deaths in Oak Ridge 3, symptoms consistent with poisoning. All victims transients or strangers to the area. Connection to Sutton whiskey. Must investigate when weather permits travel to the mountain." "He knew," she whispered. "He suspected something weeks ago." She continued reading, finding Elijah's methodical notes on the victims, their symptoms, and his growing suspicion that someone was using Oak Ridge as a testing ground for poisons. The final entry, dated the day he left for the Sutton homestead, chilled her. "Information received that Confederate officers have been seen meeting with the Sutton brothers. Source believes they are developing chemical agents for battlefield use. If confirmed, we'll need to contact Union Command immediately. God help us if such weapons are deployed in this already bloody war." Charlotte closed the journal, her mind racing. This is why they killed him. He discovered their poison weapons program. Caleb leaned forward intently. "Mrs. Hobbs, if your husband recorded this information, those men will tear your house apart looking for it. And when they don't find it, they'll keep searching," she concluded. "Which means we're not safe here for long." She glanced at Thomas, still sleeping peacefully. Her son had already lost his father. She would not let him lose his mother as well. Yet the information in Elijah's journal, combined with whatever Wilkes had recovered from the Sutton cabin, could save countless lives if it reached Union authorities. "We need to get to Knoxville," she decided. "The Union commander there should see this journal along with the other evidence." Caleb looked doubtful. "It's 30 miles through Confederate territory, Mrs. Hobbs, with patrols everywhere and likely men searching specifically for us." Charlotte's expression hardened. "Then we'll avoid the main roads. Elijah mapped every trail and stream in this region. We can follow the ridge lines east, then drop down to the Union lines." The young man studied her face, then nodded slowly. "If you're determined, I'll see you there safely. I gave my word to the sheriff long ago that I'd protect his family if ever needed." Charlotte raised an eyebrow. "Did you know?" "Yes, ma'am. When he helped clear my brother's name after the desertion charge. Said if anything happened to him, the Winston family owed a debt to the Hobbs family." For the first time since hearing of Elijah's death, Charlotte felt tears threaten. She blinked them back, focusing instead on practical matters. "We'll rest today and travel tonight. Less chance of being spotted." While Thomas explored the cabin under Caleb's watchful eye, Charlotte inventoried their supplies and studied Elijah's hand-drawn maps. By midday, she had plotted a route that would keep them on high ground, away from Confederate patrols likely to be moving along valley roads. As dusk approached, Charlotte woke Thomas from his afternoon nap and helped him dress warmly for the journey ahead. "Mama?" he asked, his small face serious. "Is Papa meeting us in Knoxville?" The question struck her like a physical blow. She had not yet told him of Elijah's death, hoping to put distance between them and danger before facing that painful conversation. Kneeling before him, Charlotte took her son's hands. "Thomas, I need to tell you something very important and very sad." As gently as possible, she explained that his father had died while protecting others from bad men. Thomas's eyes filled with tears, but he listened with a composure that broke Charlotte's heart anew. "Was Papa brave?" he asked finally. "The bravest," Charlotte assured him, pulling him close. "And he loved you more than anything in this world." Thomas nodded against her shoulder. "Then I'll be brave too. For Papa." Charlotte held him until his quiet tears subsided, then wiped her own eyes and stood. "It's time to go, sweetheart. We have a long journey ahead." They set out as the last light faded from the sky, riding single file along a narrow ridge trail. Charlotte led, with Thomas secure before her on the saddle, while Caleb brought up the rear, rifle at the ready. The quarter moon provided just enough light to navigate without risking lanterns that might be spotted from below. They had covered perhaps 5 miles when Caleb suddenly raised his hand, signaling a halt. Charlotte reined in, listening intently. In the valley far below, torches moved like fireflies through the darkness, a search party, methodically combing the lower slopes of the mountain. "They're persistent," Caleb whispered. Charlotte nodded grimly. "They're afraid. Whatever Elijah and Deputy Wilkes discovered has them terrified it will reach Union hands." They remained motionless until the torch-bearing searchers moved farther down the valley. Then Charlotte guided them onto an even narrower path that wound through a dense thicket of mountain laurel, virtually invisible unless one knew exactly where to look. The night stretched on, their progress slowed by the need for stealth and the increasingly rugged terrain. Thomas, despite his earlier declaration of bravery, eventually dozed against his mother's chest, the rhythm of the horse's movement lulling him to sleep. Charlotte's arms ached from holding both her son and the reins, but she pushed the discomfort aside, focusing only on the path ahead. Near midnight, they crested a ridge that offered a panoramic view of the surrounding countryside. Far to the east, the lights of Knoxville glimmered like earthbound stars. Their destination, still a full day's journey away. "We'll rest the horses," Charlotte decided, dismounting stiffly. "Just for an hour," while Thomas slept wrapped in a blanket. Charlotte and Caleb shared cold biscuits and jerky, speaking in hushed tones about the path ahead. The young man's respect for the sheriff's widow had grown with each mile of their journey. "Mrs. Hobbs," he ventured, "when this is over, what will you do? Will you stay in Oak Ridge?" Charlotte gazed toward the distant lights of Knoxville. "I don't know. Everything depends on reaching Union lines with Elijah's journal. After that, she shrugged. After that, I'll rebuild our lives somehow." A sudden snap of a twig in the darkness silenced them both. Caleb reached for his rifle while Charlotte drew her revolver, moving instinctively to position herself between the sound and her sleeping son. "Who's there?" Caleb called, his voice firm despite his youth. "Show yourself." Silence answered him, then a soft rustling as something or someone moved through the underbrush. Charlotte aimed toward the sound, finger poised on the trigger. A figure emerged from the shadows, hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Don't shoot! It's Wilkes! Deputy Wilkes!" Chapter 7. Convergence in darkness. Charlotte lowered her revolver slowly, disbelief warring with hope. "Deputy Wilkes? Caleb said you were headed to Union lines with evidence from the Sutton cabin." The figure limped closer, revealing himself indeed to be Gregory Wilkes, though in a state Charlotte barely recognized. His face was gaunt, streaked with dirt and dried blood. His left arm hung uselessly at his side, the shoulder of his coat caked with dark stains. "Was headed that way," Wilkes confirmed, his voice a ragged whisper. "Got separated from Mr. Winston during a Confederate patrol sweep. Been trying to find my way back ever since." Caleb hurried to help the deputy sit. "What happened to Pa? Is he safe?" "Last I saw, he was heading east with the Sutton documents using an old hunting trail. We agreed to split up when we spotted the patrol, better chance of at least one of us getting through." Wilkes winced as he settled against a fallen log. "That was yesterday morning." Charlotte fetched water while Caleb examined Wilkes' wound. The bullet graze had become infected, angry red streaks extending from the wound down his arm. "You need a doctor," Charlotte said, offering the canteen. Wilkes drank deeply before responding. "What I need is to complete my mission. Sheriff gave his life so those documents could reach Union command. I aim to honor that sacrifice. We're headed to Knoxville ourselves," Charlotte told him, gesturing to Elijah's journal. "My husband kept records of his investigation. Notes about the poison deaths in Oak Ridge." Wilkes' eyes widened. "Mrs. Hobbs, that journal could be the key to understanding the full scope of what the Suttons were doing. The documents I carried detailed their experiments, but not the broader application of their work. Elijah believed they were developing chemical weapons for battlefield use," Charlotte said. The deputy nodded grimly. "That aligns with what I saw in their workshop. They'd moved beyond simply testing poisons. They were working on delivery methods. Ways to poison enemy water supplies, contaminate equipment, even airborne compounds." A chill ran through Charlotte at the implications. If such weapons were deployed on a large scale, the already devastating war could become something far more horrific. We need to move, she decided, gathering their supplies. The longer we delay, the more likely those weapons might be used. They roused Thomas and redistributed their supplies to accommodate Wilkes. The deputy was too weak to ride alone, so Caleb took him up behind his saddle while Charlotte and Thomas led the way once more. The path grew increasingly treacherous as they navigated the ridgeline in darkness. Twice they were forced to dismount and lead the horses across particularly narrow passages, sheer drops looming on either side. "My father used to hunt these ridges," Wilkes commented as they carefully picked their way forward. "Said only fools and desperate men traveled them at night." "Which are we?" Caleb asked, supporting the deputy's weight. A ghost of a smile crossed Wilkes' haggard face. "Both, I expect." Dawn found them descending the eastern slope of the mountains, the terrain gradually becoming less severe. They had covered nearly half the distance to Knoxville. But the most dangerous part of their journey lay ahead, crossing the valley floor where Confederate patrols were most active. Charlotte called a halt in a sheltered hollow fed by a small spring. The horses needed rest, and Wilkes' condition was deteriorating despite his stoic silence, while Thomas collected firewood under Caleb's supervision. Charlotte helped Wilkes remove his coat to properly examine his wound. The infection had worsened, the skin around the bullet graze hot and swollen. "I have some knowledge of herbs," she told him, searching through her pack for the small pouch of medicinal plants she always carried. "It's not much, but it might help fight the infection." As she worked cleaning the wound and applying a poultice of crushed yarrow and comfrey, Wilkes spoke in low tones about Elijah's final moments. "He saved my life, Mrs. Hobbs. Drew their fire so I could escape with the evidence. I've never seen such courage." Charlotte's hands remained steady, despite the pain his words evoked. "That sounds like my husband, always putting others before himself. He talked about you and Thomas often," Wilkes continued. "Said you were the reason he became sheriff, wanted to make Oak Ridge safe for his family." Charlotte secured the poultice with a clean strip of cloth torn from her petticoat. "And now we must make sure his sacrifice wasn't in vain." They allowed themselves a few hours of rest, taking turns standing watch. The forest around them remained quiet save for the occasional cry of a hawk or rustle of small game. By mid-afternoon they were ready to move again, Wilkes looking marginally better after food and Charlotte's herbal ministrations. "We should reach the valley road by nightfall," Charlotte said, studying Elijah's map. "From there we'll need to cross open country to reach Union lines. That's when we'll be most vulnerable." Caleb, who had been scouting ahead, returned with troubling news. "Smoke rising from multiple locations down in the valley. Looks like they're burning homesteads." "They're eliminating potential hiding places," Wilkes realized, "and sending a message to anyone who might help us." Charlotte's expression hardened. "They won't stop us. Not now." They set out once more, keeping to the cover of the forest for as long as possible. As the trees thinned and the land flattened before them, Charlotte called another halt to assess their situation. The valley stretched before them, bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. From their vantage point, they could see the main road winding toward Knoxville about 12 miles distant. Several farmhouses smoldered, confirming Caleb's report. More disturbing were the mounted patrols visible at regular intervals along the road, at least 3 separate groups of Confederate cavalry. "We can't avoid them entirely," Charlotte concluded, "but we might be able to slip between patrols after dark." They waited for nightfall, sharing the last of their provisions. Thomas, sensing the tension, remained unusually quiet, staying close to his mother's side. Charlotte wrapped an arm around him, drawing strength from his presence. "You're being very brave," she told him softly. "Your father would be proud." Thomas looked up at her with Elijah's eyes. "Will the bad men catch us, Mama?" Charlotte met his gaze steadily. "Not if I can help it. And we have Deputy Wilkes and Mr. Winston to protect us too." The boy nodded, seemingly reassured by her confidence. Charlotte wished she felt as certain as she sounded. As darkness settled over the landscape, they prepared for the final leg of their journey. The horses were left behind. They would move more quietly on foot, and the animals would likely be spotted in the open terrain. "Stay close, Thomas," Charlotte instructed, checking that Elijah's journal was secure in her dress pocket. "Hold my hand and do exactly as I say, no matter what happens." They descended to the valley floor, using a dry stream for cover as long as possible. When they finally emerged, the open farmland stretched before them like a dark sea, the road a pale ribbon cutting through its center. Charlotte led them on a path perpendicular to the road, intending to cross it between patrol points. They moved from shadow to shadow, freezing in place whenever hoofbeats approached. They had almost reached the road when disaster struck. A patrol appeared unexpectedly from a side track. lanterns swinging as they cantered directly toward the hidden group. There was no time to retreat, no cover to seek. "Down!" Wilkes hissed, pulling Caleb and Thomas flat against the ground while Charlotte pressed herself into the shallow ditch beside the road. The patrol drew nearer, the horses' hooves thundering in the night. Charlotte held her breath, one hand covering Thomas's mouth to stifle any sound. Just as it seemed they might remain undetected, one of the horses snorted and shied, sensing their presence. "What is it, Brutus?" the lead rider called, reining in his mount. He raised his lantern higher, its light sweeping toward their hiding place. In that moment, Wilkes made a decision. Rising suddenly to his feet, he staggered onto the road several yards away from where Charlotte and Thomas remained hidden. "Evening, gentlemen," he called, deliberately slurring his words. "Fine night for a ride." The patrol wheeled toward him, weapons drawn. "Identify yourself," the leader demanded. Wilkes swayed dramatically, just a poor traveler seeking shelter. "My house was burned by some overzealous patriots this morning." The soldiers relaxed slightly, though their weapons remained trained on the deputy. "You're out past curfew, old man. Where are you headed?" "Anywhere with a roof and a drop of whiskey," Wilkes replied, taking an unsteady step forward. "Perhaps you fine soldiers could direct me?" As the patrol's attention focused on Wilkes, Charlotte seized the opportunity. "Now," she whispered, guiding Thomas across the road behind the soldiers' backs, Caleb following close behind. They had almost reached the safety of the far side when Thomas's foot caught on an exposed root. He stumbled, catching himself with a small cry that seemed deafening in the tense silence. The patrol leader spun around, raising his lantern. "Who's there? Show yourselves." In one fluid motion, Wilkes drew his revolver and fired. The lead soldier toppled from his saddle as chaos erupted. The remaining patrol members returned fire, their shots finding the deputy's already wounded body. "Run!" Wilkes shouted, firing again despite the bullets striking him. "Get to Knoxville!" Charlotte scooped Thomas into her arms and sprinted for the cover of a distant hedgerow, Caleb close behind. Behind them, the gunfire continued briefly, then fell silent. They ran until their lungs burned, the sounds of pursuit growing steadily closer. The sacrifice of Deputy Gregory Wilkes had bought them precious time, but not enough. The night was alive with shouting men and pounding hoofbeats. As they crested a small rise, Charlotte spotted a structure in the distance, a stone bridge spanning a swift-flowing river that marked the boundary between Confederate-held territory and the Union's outer defensive perimeter around Knoxville. "The bridge," she gasped, pointing. "If we can cross it, ... quotes." Caleb nodded grimly, taking Thomas from her arms to speed their progress. "We're going to make it, Mrs. Hobbs, for the sheriff and for Wilkes." But the pursuit was closing fast as they descended toward the river. Charlotte could see torches spreading out in a wide arc behind them, the Confederates attempting to cut off any escape route. With the bridge now only 100 yards away, she allowed herself a moment of hope. That hope shattered as a group of riders appeared directly in their path, emerging from the shadows of the riverbank. Charlotte drew her revolver, pushing Thomas behind her. "Stay back," she warned Caleb. "Take my son and find another way across if you can." Before Caleb could respond, the lead rider raised a hand in greeting. "Mrs. Hobbs? Charlotte Hobbs?" Charlotte kept her weapon raised, confused by the man's knowledge of her name. "Who's asking?" The rider moved forward slowly, revealing the blue uniform of a Union cavalry officer, Captain James Porter, 5th Ohio Cavalry. "We've been sent to find you." Chapter 8, Revelations and Reckoning. The Union camp outside Knoxville buzzed with activity despite the late hour. Messengers came and went from the command tent where Charlotte sat with Thomas sleeping beside her, exhausted from their ordeal. Across the table, Captain Porter and a gray-haired officer with general's insignia studied Elijah's journal and the documents recovered from the Sutton cabin. "This is worse than we feared," the general muttered, looking up from a detailed chemical formula. "If these weapons were deployed on the battlefield, ... they won't be," Charlotte said firmly. "Not now that you have the formulas and can prepare countermeasures." Porter nodded. "Thanks to your husband's sacrifice, and yours, Mrs. Hobbs." The general, who had introduced himself simply as General Adams, closed the journal with a troubled expression. "The men who orchestrated this program are still at large. Colonel Brenner and his associates." "Actually, sir," a young lieutenant interrupted, entering the tent with a dispatch. "Our scouts report Brenner was among those killed at the Sutton cabin." Deputy Wilkes confirmed his identity from the bodies. Charlotte felt a complex mix of emotions at this news relief that one architect of the chemical weapons program was dead, yet no sense of justice or closure regarding Elijah's murder. "And the others involved?" she asked. General Adams accepted the dispatch, scanning it quickly. "We're rounding them up based on the names in these documents. Several high-ranking Confederate officers have already been taken into custody." Caleb, who had been standing silently near the tent entrance, spoke up. "What about my father? Any word?" Captain Porter's expression softened. "Jeremiah Winston reached our lines yesterday, Mr. Winston. He's resting in the field hospital, exhausted but otherwise unharmed." Relief washed over Caleb's face. Charlotte reached out to squeeze the young man's hand, grateful that at least one family had been spared further loss. "And Deputy Wilkes?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Porter shook his head solemnly. "We found his body at the roadside. He took down 3 Confederate soldiers before they killed him." "A brave man." "The bravest," Charlotte agreed, remembering Wilkes' final act of sacrifice. "Along with my husband." General Adams closed the documents into a leather dispatch case. "Mrs. Hobbs, your husband's investigation and these documents may have changed the course of this war. Had these chemical weapons been deployed, the suffering on both sides would have been unimaginable." Charlotte nodded, too emotionally exhausted for pride or satisfaction. "What happens now?" "For you and your son's safety," the general replied. "We can arrange passage north, away from the fighting. Perhaps to relatives." "My sister lives in Philadelphia," Charlotte acknowledged. "But before I leave Tennessee, I want to see justice done for Elijah. Not just the men who gave the orders, but those who killed him." Porter and Adams exchanged looks. "Most of Brenner's men died at the Sutton cabin, or during the pursuit," Porter explained. "Those who survive will face military tribunal." It wasn't the personal reckoning Charlotte had imagined, but it would have to suffice. Elijah had always believed in justice through proper channels, even when it proved less satisfying than frontier justice. "Then I'll take my son to Philadelphia," she decided. "At least until the war ends." 3 days later, Charlotte stood at a freshly dug grave in the military cemetery outside Knoxville. The simple wooden marker bore Elijah's name, rank, and a brief inscription: "He gave his life that others might live." Thomas stood beside her, solemn in his Sunday best. Behind them, a small honor guard from the Union garrison presented arms as a bugler played a mournful taps. Captain Porter approached as the ceremony concluded. "Mrs. Hobbs, your transport north leaves at dawn tomorrow. Is there anything else you need before your departure?" Charlotte gazed at her husband's grave, emotion threatening to overwhelm the composure she had maintained for Thomas's sake. "There is one thing. I'd like to visit the Sutton cabin to see where Elijah fell." Porter looked surprised. "Are you certain?" "There's nothing there now but ashes. We burned it to eliminate any remaining traces of their work." "I'm certain," Charlotte replied firmly. "I need to see it. For closure." The captain nodded in understanding. "I'll escort you myself." The journey back into the mountains was far easier with a Union cavalry escort than their harrowing escape had been. By mid-afternoon, they crested the final ridge overlooking what had once been the Sutton homestead. Charlotte left Thomas with a young corporal and walked the final stretch alone, Porter discreetly falling back to give her privacy. The cabin was indeed gone, reduced to a blackened foundation. The surrounding outbuildings, the woodshed where Ezekiel's body had been found, the smokehouse where Elijah had sent Wilkes with the evidence, were similarly destroyed. She knelt in the snow where she imagined Elijah might have stood in his final moments. Despite the fire, she could still make out dark stains on some of the remaining foundation stones, blood that even flames could not fully erase. "I hope you found peace," she whispered, removing her glove to touch the cold stone. "I hope you knew how much we loved you." As she rose to leave, something caught her eye, a small metal object protruding from the snow near what had been the cabin's back step. Charlotte brushed away the snow to reveal Elijah's pocket watch. Its case dented from a bullet impact, but the mechanism inside still ticking faintly. She pressed it to her heart, this small piece of her husband that had somehow survived the destruction. It wasn't justice, but it was something to hold on to, a tangible reminder of the man who had given everything to protect others. Captain Porter approached respectfully. "Found something?" Charlotte nodded, showing him the watch. "A piece of Elijah to take with us to Philadelphia." "A good omen," Porter suggested kindly. "A reminder that something always survives, even after the worst destruction." They rejoined Thomas and the escort for the return journey to Knoxville. As they rode away, Charlotte looked back once at the mountain that had claimed her husband's life, yet also revealed his greatest courage. The setting sun bathed the snow-covered peaks in golden light, a beauty that persisted despite the darkness of human actions. In the morning, she and Thomas would board a northbound train carrying Elijah's journal, his pocket watch, and most importantly, his legacy of courage and sacrifice. The war would continue. Men would fight and die on bloody fields across the divided nation. But the particular horror of the Sutton brothers' deadly whiskey had been prevented. For now, that would have to be enough. Chapter 9. The Journey North. The train rattled northward through the war-torn landscape. its rhythm a constant companion to Charlotte's thoughts. Thomas sat beside her, his face pressed against the window glass, watching the scenery change from the mountains of Tennessee to the rolling hills of Virginia. 3 days had passed since they'd left Knoxville, yet Charlotte still felt the shadow of recent events like a physical weight. In her lap rested a small leather-bound book, not Elijah's journal, which was now in Union hands, but a new one she had purchased before their departure. In it she had begun recording their experiences, preserving the truth of what had happened at the Sutton cabin and the courage of those who had died to prevent a terrible weapon from being unleashed. "Mama," Thomas said, turning from the window, "when we get to Philadelphia, will we tell Aunt Margaret about Papa?" Charlotte smoothed her son's hair gently. "Yes, sweetheart. Your Aunt Margaret loved your father very much. She wanted to know how brave he was." Thomas nodded solemnly. "And Deputy Wilkes, too. And Mr. Winston, who helped us, all of them," Charlotte agreed. "It's important that people remember." The train slowed as they approached a station in northern Virginia. Union soldiers patrolled the platform, a reminder that they traveled through contested territory where Confederate raiders sometimes disrupted rail lines. Quote, Charlotte tensed instinctively, her hand moving to the revolver concealed in her travel bag. Captain Porter, who had accompanied them as escort, noticed her unease. "We're still well within Union lines, Mrs. Hobbs. Nothing to worry about." Charlotte forced herself to relax. "Old habits. I've spent the past week expecting danger at every turn." "Understandably so," Porter replied. "But you're safe now." As the train took on water and new passengers, Charlotte observed a commotion at the far end of the platform. A military courier was speaking urgently to the station master, who then hurried toward their car. "Captain Porter?" the station master called. "Urgent dispatch for you, sir." Porter accepted the sealed envelope with a frown. Charlotte watched his expression darken as he read its contents. "Bad news?" she ventured when he had finished. "Potentially," he admitted, folding the dispatch carefully. "One of Colonel Brenner's associates escaped custody during transport to Washington. Lieutenant Malcolm Blackwood." Charlotte felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter, air seeping through the train windows. "The man Deputy Wilkes fought near the Winston farm." Porter nodded grimly. "The same. Wilkes thought he'd killed him, but Blackwood was merely wounded. He was captured by one of our patrols 2 days later. And now he's free again," Charlotte concluded. "Do they think he'll try to continue Brenner's work?" "Unlikely. The formulas and documentation are secure, but he might seek revenge against those who exposed the program." The implication hung in the air between them. Charlotte glanced at Thomas, now dozing against her shoulder, then back to Porter. "We're still going to Philadelphia," she said firmly. "I won't live in fear." Porter's expression softened with respect. "Of course not. But we'll take additional precautions until Blackwood is recaptured." The journey resumed with a new tension. At each stop, Porter would step onto the platform, conferring with local military authorities before allowing Charlotte and Thomas to stretch their legs. The captain arranged for an additional escort, a young lieutenant named Crawford, to join them for the final leg to Philadelphia. Despite these measures, Charlotte refused to let fear dictate their journey. When Thomas asked about the extra soldiers, she explained simply that they were traveling companions heading the same way, neither hiding the truth nor burdening her son with adult concerns. On the 4th day, as they crossed into Pennsylvania, the atmosphere on the train subtly shifted. The obvious military presence decreased, replaced by civilians going about their business far from the front lines of the conflict. Women in fashionable dresses chatted about social engagements, while businessmen discussed commerce and politics. The war seemed almost abstract here, a distant concern rather than an immediate reality. Charlotte observed this normalcy with a mixture of longing and disconnect. How could she return to such everyday concerns after what she had witnessed? Would she ever again be the woman who worried about social calls and household management rather than survival and justice? As the train approached Philadelphia in the late afternoon, Charlotte gathered their few belongings. Thomas, excited to see his aunt and cousins, bounced with barely contained energy. "Remember your manners when we reach Aunt Margaret's," Charlotte reminded him, straightening his collar. "It's been a long journey for everyone, Porter and Lieutenant." Crawford escorted them from the station to a waiting carriage. The captain had arranged for a military escort to accompany them to Margaret's home in a respectable neighborhood north of the city center. The streets of Philadelphia bustled with activity even as dusk approached. Gas lamps flickered to life as they passed elegant townhouses and busy shops. For Thomas, who had rarely left Oak Ridge before, the city was a marvel of sights and sounds. Margaret's home appeared much as Charlotte remembered from her last visit 5 years earlier, a neat 3-story brick townhouse with white trim and carefully tended window boxes, though now dormant for winter. As their carriage stopped at the front gate, The door flew open to reveal Charlotte's sister, a slightly plumper version of Charlotte herself, her face alight with welcome and relief. "Charlotte, Thomas." Margaret hurried down the steps, arms outstretched. "We've been so worried." The sisters embraced while Thomas received an enthusiastic hug from his cousins, Margaret's daughters Emma and Sarah, aged 10 and 8. The simple human connection after so much danger brought tears to Charlotte's eyes. "Come inside, all of you," Margaret urged, including Porter and Crawford in her invitation. "William has dinner waiting, and you must be exhausted." Margaret's husband, William, a successful attorney with a practice in the city, greeted them warmly. The military escorts declined the invitation to stay, Porter explaining that they would return to their duties after ensuring the Hobbs' safe arrival. Before departing, Porter took Charlotte aside. "We'll maintain a watch on the house for the next week, just as a precaution. Lieutenant Crawford will check in daily." "Thank you, Captain," Charlotte replied sincerely. "For everything." Porter nodded, his expression softening. "Your husband was a hero, Mrs. Hobbs. I hope you find peace here." After the officers departed, the family gathered in Margaret's comfortable dining room. The table was laden with more food than Charlotte and Thomas had seen in months. War shortages had barely touched Philadelphia compared to the devastated South. As they ate, Margaret and William exchanged concerned glances, clearly bursting with questions but restraining themselves in front of the children. Eventually, William suggested that the cousins show Thomas the playroom upstairs, giving the adults privacy to talk. Once the children had disappeared, Margaret reached across the table to grasp Charlotte's hand. "We received the Army's telegram about Elijah." "I'm so sorry, Charlotte. So very sorry." The simple acknowledgement of her loss broke something in Charlotte. For the first time since learning of Elijah's death, she allowed herself to fully grieve, tears flowing freely as Margaret moved to embrace her. "He died a hero," Charlotte managed between sobs, "stopping something terrible." William, who had connections in Washington through his legal work, nodded solemnly. "We've heard rumors about chemical weapons. Was Elijah involved in exposing that program?" Charlotte wiped her eyes, composing herself. "He discovered it and gave his life to ensure the evidence reached Union authorities." Over the next hour, she recounted the events at the Sutton cabin, their harrowing escape through the mountains, and Deputy Wilkes' sacrifice. She omitted the more graphic details, but ensured Margaret and William understood the significance of what had been prevented. "And now this Lieutenant Blackwood has escaped," Margaret said worriedly when Charlotte mentioned the news they'd received on the train. "Do you think he'll come after you?" "It's unlikely," Charlotte replied with more confidence than she felt. "His face is known to authorities throughout the North. He'd be captured quickly if he appeared in Philadelphia." William's expression remained troubled. "Nevertheless, I'll speak with the police commissioner tomorrow. Additional patrols in the neighborhood would be prudent." "I won't live in fear," Charlotte insisted, echoing her words to Captain Porter. "Thomas and I have endured enough. We came here to rebuild our lives, not hide away." Margaret squeezed her hand. "No one's suggesting hiding, dear. Just reasonable precautions until this man is recaptured." "Of course," Charlotte conceded. "I'm sorry. It's been difficult." "You don't need to apologize," William assured her. "What you've been through would test anyone's resilience. The fact that you're here, that you got Thomas safely away, that shows extraordinary strength." Later that night, after Thomas had been settled in the bedroom he would share with his cousins, Charlotte stood by the window of her own room, gazing out at the unfamiliar city skyline. Philadelphia's gas lamps created pools of golden light along the streets, so different from the rural darkness of Oak Ridge. Elijah's pocket watch sat on the nightstand, its steady ticking a comfort in the strange surroundings. She opened it, running her finger over the inscription inside to it. "May you always find your way home." "See, I'm trying to find my way without you," she whispered to the empty room. "It's harder than I imagined." Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by dreams of pursuit through endless forests, of Elijah calling her name from just beyond reach. She woke before dawn, the house still silent around her. Rather than fighting for more sleep, Charlotte lit a small lamp and opened her journal, recording her thoughts and memories while the household slumbered. The following days established a tentative routine. William left each morning for his law office downtown, while Margaret managed the household with practiced efficiency. Charlotte found herself welcomed into this domestic rhythm, helping with the children's lessons and assisting with household tasks that kept hands busy even when her mind wandered. Lieutenant Crawford appeared each afternoon, ostensibly to inquire after their welfare, but clearly following orders to maintain surveillance. His visits gradually took on a more social character as the young officer's initial formality gave way to genuine concern for the widow and child of a man he had come to admire through their story. A week after their arrival, Crawford brought news that the military escort would be reduced, as intelligence suggested Blackwood had fled west rather than north. "The manhunt continues," he assured Charlotte as they walked in Margaret's small garden. "But the immediate threat to you and Thomas appears to have diminished." Charlotte nodded, surprised to find herself almost disappointed. The lieutenant's visits had become a welcome connection to the events in Tennessee, someone who understood what they had experienced without requiring explanation. "Will you continue to visit, Lieutenant?" she asked. "Thomas has grown quite fond of your stories about the cavalry." Crawford's expression brightened. "I would be honored, Mrs. Hobbs. My duties permit some flexibility while my unit remains stationed here." As winter gave way to early spring, Philadelphia revealed itself as a city of contrasts. Despite the ongoing war, commerce thrived. Yet hospitals overflowed with wounded soldiers, and black-draped doorways marked homes in mourning. Charlotte found herself navigating this dichotomy, rebuilding a life of normalcy for Thomas, while never forgetting what they had endured. Margaret's social circle gradually embraced Charlotte, though she maintained a certain reserve with these women whose understanding of the war came primarily from newspaper accounts. Only with Lieutenant Crawford, during his increasingly frequent visits, did she speak openly of Tennessee and the events at the Sutton cabin. Thomas adapted more readily, forming fast friendships with his cousins and neighborhood children. At night, however, he sometimes woke crying for his father. On those occasions, Charlotte would hold him close, reminding him of Elijah's courage and the difference he had made. "Papa stopped bad men from hurting lots of people," Thomas would repeat, finding comfort in the narrative of heroism rather than senseless loss. In early April, as the city's gardens erupted with spring blooms, William returned from his office with news that sent a chill through Charlotte's newly established sense of security. "Lieutenant Blackwood has been spotted in Baltimore," he reported grimly over dinner after the children had been excused. "Military intelligence believes he's working his way north." Margaret gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "He's coming here? After Charlotte?" William shook his head. "Nothing confirms that, but the pattern of sightings suggests movement in this direction." Charlotte set down her fork carefully, sudden nausea replacing her appetite. "I won't uproot Thomas again. We've just begun to settle." "No one's suggesting that," William assured her, "but perhaps increased vigilance would be wise." Lieutenant Crawford, when informed the following day, insisted on resuming daily checks on the household. He also arranged for plainclothes army investigators to maintain a discreet watch on the neighborhood. "Blackwood would be a fool to attempt anything here," he told Charlotte as they walked Thomas to his new school. "But fools can be dangerous precisely because their actions defy rational prediction." Charlotte appreciated his candor. Too many people in her new life treated her as fragile, avoiding difficult truths in her presence. Crawford, perhaps because he had seen the aftermath of the Tennessee events, never made that mistake. "I've been thinking," she said as they watched Thomas join his classmates in the schoolyard, "about what comes after the war, when Thomas and I can return to Tennessee." Crawford looked surprised. "You intend to go back? After everything that happened?" "Oak Ridge is still our home," Charlotte replied simply. "Elijah built our life there. I'm not ready to abandon it permanently." "That shows remarkable courage, Mrs. Hobbs." Charlotte shook her head. "Not courage. Just stubbornness, perhaps. I won't let Brenner and his men take anything more from us than they already have." As they turned to walk back to Margaret's home, Charlotte noticed a figure across the street, a man in a dark coat, his face obscured by a broad-brimmed hat. Something about his posture, the way he held himself perfectly still while observing the school, triggered an instinctive alarm. "Lieutenant," she murmured, nodding subtly toward the stranger. "That man," Crawford followed her gaze, his hand moving instinctively toward the revolver concealed beneath his uniform jacket. "Stay behind me, Mrs. Hobbs." Before either could act, the man seemed to sense their attention. He turned and walked briskly away, disappearing around a corner. "Could it be coincidence?" Charlotte asked, her heart racing. "Just a parent watching the school?" Crawford's expression was grim. "Perhaps. But I'll notify the investigators immediately. Can you describe him?" Charlotte tried to recall details, but realized how little she had actually seen. "Medium height. Dark coat. Nothing distinctive except ... double quotes except," Crawford prompted. "The way he stood, perfectly still, like a hunter. I've seen that stance before when Elijah would watch for deer from our porch." Crawford escorted her directly home, then left to report the sighting. Charlotte found herself jumping at every noise that afternoon, checking windows, her hand straying repeatedly to the drawer where she kept Elijah's revolver. "You're scaring yourself needlessly," she muttered, forcing her hands to remain steady as she helped Margaret prepare dinner. "One stranger near a school doesn't mean anything." But that night, after the household was asleep, Charlotte woke to the distinct sound of someone testing the latch on the garden door below her window. She rose silently, retrieving the revolver before moving to peer cautiously between the curtains. In the moonlight, she could make out a figure in the garden, the same broad-brimmed hat, the same stillness she had noticed earlier. As she watched, the man moved toward the garden door again, something metallic glinting in his hand. Charlotte didn't hesitate. She slipped from her room to Thomas's, waking him with a hand gently covering his mouth. "Quiet, sweetheart," she whispered. "We need to go to Uncle William's study." "Like a game." The boy nodded, eyes wide but trusting. Charlotte led him silently down the hallway to William and Margaret's room, rapping softly on the door. William appeared almost immediately, as if he hadn't been sleeping. "Charlotte?" "What, someone's trying to break in through the garden door," she interrupted quietly. "I need you to take Thomas while I wake Margaret and the girls." To his credit, William asked no questions, simply nodding and taking Thomas's hand. "My study has a sturdy lock. We'll go there." Within minutes, the entire household was secured in Williams's book-lined study, the heavy oak door locked from within. William had his own pistol, a surprise to Charlotte had sent their housekeeper out the front door to fetch the police. "Should we have all left?" Margaret fretted, holding her daughters close on the leather sofa. "No," William replied firmly. "Better to secure ourselves here than risk an encounter outside. The police will arrive shortly." Charlotte stood by the window that overlooked the street, revolver ready, watching for any sign of movement. "I shouldn't have brought this danger to your home," she said softly. "I'm sorry." William joined her at the window. "This is not your fault, Charlotte. You expose dangerous men doing unconscionable things. If there's blame to be placed, it belongs entirely with them." A sudden crash from the back of the house made them all jump. Glass shattering, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. "Is inside," Charlotte whispered, moving away from the window toward the door. "William, keep everyone back." Before William could protest, another sound joined the intruder's footsteps, the front door bursting open, multiple voices calling out commands. The Philadelphia police arriving just in time. A commotion followed, shouts, a single gunshot, then silence. Charlotte and William exchanged looks of mingled hope and dread. A firm knock on the study door made them all flinch. "Police? Is anyone inside?" William moved Charlotte gently aside, keeping his pistol ready as he called back. "William Bradford and family. Is it safe to open the door?" "Yes, sir." "We've apprehended the intruder." William unlocked the door to reveal two uniformed officers, their expressions professionally neutral despite the unusual situation. "Everyone all right in here?" the older officer asked, surveying the family grouped behind William. "We're unharmed," William confirmed. "Is the man alive?" The officer nodded. "Wounded but alive. Tried to flee through the garden when we arrived. Detective Murray shot him in the leg." Charlotte stepped forward. "May I see him? I need to know if it's who I think it is." The officers exchanged glances before the senior man nodded reluctantly. "Briefly. We'll be removing him to the hospital under guard, then to jail once he's treated." In the kitchen, illuminated by hastily lit lamps, a man lay on the floor, hands cuffed behind his back, a rudimentary bandage around his thigh already soaking with blood. His broad-brimmed hat had fallen away, revealing features Charlotte had never seen but instantly recognized from descriptions. "Lieutenant Malcolm Blackwood," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. The man's eyes flickered with surprise, then narrowed in hatred. "Mrs. Hobbs, you recognize me?" "I recognize what you are," Charlotte replied coldly. "A coward who experiments on helpless people and murders good men like my husband." Blackwood's lips twisted in a mirthless smile. "Your husband was a fool who stumbled into matters beyond his understanding. Just like you." One of the officers moved to intervene, but Charlotte raised a hand. "It's all right. I just needed confirmation." She turned back to Blackwood. "The work you and Brenner started is finished. Formulas are destroyed or in Union hands. You've failed completely. For now," Blackwood spat. "But war never truly ends, Mrs. Hobbs. There will always be men willing to use any means necessary for victory. Remember that when you think your husband's sacrifice meant something." Charlotte studied him for a moment, pity replacing her initial fear and anger. "That's where you're wrong, Lieutenant. Every stand against cruelty matters. Every act of courage inspires others. My husband and Deputy Wilkes may be gone, but the example they set lives on." She turned away, unwilling to give him another moment of her attention. As the officers prepared to transport their prisoner, Charlotte rejoined her family in the study, where Thomas immediately ran to her arms. "Was it one of the bad men, Mama?" he asked, his small face serious beyond his years. Charlotte knelt to his level, choosing her words carefully. "It was, but he can't hurt us now. The police have him, and he'll face justice for what he did to Papa and the others." Thomas processed this, then nodded with the simple acceptance of childhood. "Papa would be glad." "Yes," Charlotte agreed, holding him close. Papa would be very glad. Later, as dawn broke over the city, Charlotte sat in the kitchen with Margaret, William, and Lieutenant Crawford, who had arrived shortly after receiving word of Blackwood's capture. "This confirms our suspicions that he came specifically for revenge," Crawford said gravely. "The prosecutor will add attempted murder to his other charges. Will Charlotte need to testify?" Margaret asked, concern evident in her voice. Crawford nodded. "Eventually, yes. But the military tribunal will handle the charges related to the chemical weapons program first. That alone will likely result in a hanging." Charlotte stared into her cooling tea, conflicted emotions swirling within her. "I thought his capture would bring closure. Instead, I just feel empty." "Justice isn't the same as healing," William observed gently. "One happens in a courtroom. The other takes place in the heart, over time. And sometimes justice must be enough," Crawford added. "At least for now." As the city fully awakened around them, Charlotte made a decision. "I'd like to visit Elijah's parents in Ohio. They deserve to hear about their son's courage directly from me, not from an impersonal military report." Margaret reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "Of course, when you're ready, we'll help make arrangements." "And after that?" Crawford asked quietly. Charlotte looked toward the stairs where the children now stirred, life continuing despite the night's disruption. "After that, we rebuild, day by day. It's what Elijah would have wanted." The lieutenant nodded, understanding in his eyes. "If I may say so, Mrs. Hobbs. The courage that ran in your husband clearly runs in you as well." Charlotte offered a small, genuine smile, perhaps her first since leaving Tennessee. "Not courage, Lieutenant. Just love. For my son, for Elijah's memory, and for the future we still have to build." Outside, spring sunlight bathed Philadelphia in golden promise, a new day dawning after the longest night. Chapter 10. Echoes Through Time, October 1884. Oak Ridge, Tennessee. The autumn leaves crunched beneath Charlotte Hobbs' boots as she made her way up the familiar mountain path. 20 years had passed since she had last walked this route, fleeing for her life with a young son and evidence of atrocities. Now, at 49, her hair streaked with silver, but her posture still straight and proud, she returned to confront the final ghosts of her past. "Mother, slow down," called a deep voice from behind her. "The cabin isn't going anywhere." Charlotte paused, turning to watch her son navigate the steep trail. Thomas, now 28, bore a striking resemblance to his father, the same determined jaw, the same thoughtful eyes. After completing his education at the University of Pennsylvania, he had followed in his Uncle William's footsteps, becoming a lawyer with a growing reputation for championing justice for the powerless. "Sorry," she replied with a small smile. "Old habits. Your father and I used to race each other up this trail when we were courting." Thomas caught up, adjusting the leather satchel slung over his shoulder. "Is it strange, being back after all this time?" Charlotte considered the question, gazing at the familiar ridgelines that had once been her daily view. "Yes and no. Oak Ridge has changed, new buildings, new faces, but these mountains remain exactly as they were." They resumed their climb, moving steadily toward their destination. Charlotte had returned to Oak Ridge 5 years after the war, rebuilding the sheriff's house and establishing a small school where she taught local children. Thomas had remained in Philadelphia to complete his education, spending summers in Tennessee, bridging the two worlds that had shaped his childhood. "Do you think we'll find anything?" Thomas asked as they neared the site where the Sutton cabin had once stood. "After all this time, I don't know," Charlotte admitted. But Lieutenant Crawford's letter was quite specific about Blackwood's deathbed confession. James Crawford, now Colonel Crawford, had maintained correspondence with Charlotte throughout the years. Their friendship had deepened during the months following Blackwood's capture, though duty had eventually taken him to posts across the country. His most recent letter, arriving 3 weeks earlier, had prompted this journey back into the mountains. Blackwood, imprisoned for 2 decades for his role in the Sutton brothers' experiments, had finally succumbed to tuberculosis in a military prison. Before dying, he had summoned Crawford and made a startling confession. Not all of the Sutton documents had been recovered. A second cache, containing what Blackwood called the most damning evidence, remained hidden at the cabin site. "Here," Charlotte said suddenly, stopping at a small clearing. This is where it stood. The forest had reclaimed most of the site. Only a stone foundation remained visible, partially covered by moss and fallen leaves. The outbuildings, the woodshed, the smokehouse had disappeared entirely, their locations marked only by subtle depressions in the earth. Thomas set down his satchel and surveyed the clearing. "How do we even begin to search?" Blackwood's directions weren't exactly precise. Beneath where blood was spilled, Charlotte quoted from Crawford's letter. He must mean the main cabin where Jedediah Sutton died. They approached the foundation cautiously. as if the ghosts of the past might materialize to defend their secrets. Charlotte knelt beside the largest stone, brushing away decades of accumulated forest debris. Here, she murmured, fingers tracing a dark stain that no amount of weathering had completely erased. This is where Elijah found him. Thomas joined her, examining the foundation stones with a lawyer's attention to detail. These stones were set after the original cabin was built. See how they differ from the others? Charlotte nodded, memories flooding back. Elijah mentioned that in his journal. He thought the cellar had been added later, when the Suttons began their work for the Confederacy. Working methodically, they began to clear the area, removing leaves and topsoil to reveal the full extent of the remaining foundation. As they worked, Charlotte found herself telling Thomas's stories of his father, not the heroic final moments that had defined Elijah in public memory, but the small, everyday acts of kindness and integrity that had defined him to those who truly knew him. He would have been so proud of you, she said as they paused to rest. Not just for your achievements, but for the man you've become. Thomas smiled, a hint of sadness in his eyes. I wish I remembered him better. Most of what I know comes from your stories and Lieutenant Colonel Crawford's letters. You carry more of him than you realize, Charlotte assured him. In your sense of justice, your compassion for others. Those were Elijah's defining qualities. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the clearing, their persistence was rewarded. Beneath one of the foundation stones, Thomas discovered a small cavity that had been deliberately created, lined with oilcloth to protect its contents from moisture. Mother, he called, excitement edging his voice. I think I've found something. Charlotte joined him, heart quickening as Thomas carefully extracted a packet wrapped in oilskins similar to what had preserved the first cache of documents 20 years earlier. Together they unwrapped it to reveal papers yellowed with age but still legible letters, formulas, and most significantly a thin journal bound in faded red leather. Ezekiel's journal, Charlotte breathed, recognizing the younger Sutton brother's name inscribed on the first page, the one Jedediah mentioned but was never found. They examined the contents reverently, aware they were holding historical evidence of a plot that could have changed the course of the war and cost countless additional lives. The journal detailed not only the experiments conducted at the cabin, but also the broader conspiracy that had authorized them names of officials far higher in the Confederate hierarchy than had previously been implicated. This would have been explosive even after the war, Thomas observed, leafing carefully through the pages. No wonder Blackwood was desperate to prevent its discovery. Charlotte nodded, a strange sense of completion washing over her. And now it's just history. These men are mostly dead, their crimes 2 decades past. Not just history, Thomas corrected gently. Evidence of courage as well. Your courage, Father's courage, Deputy Wilkes. This journal validates everything you fought to expose. As the sun began to set, they rewrapped the documents and prepared to descend the mountain. Charlotte stood for a final moment, gazing at the cleared foundation stones, the last physical reminder of where her life had irrevocably changed. Goodbye, Elijah, she whispered, too softly for Thomas to hear. We found the truth, just as you would have wanted. The return journey to Oak Ridge was made largely in companionable silence, both lost in their own thoughts. In town, curious glances followed them, the schoolteacher and her lawyer's son, returning from the mountains with mud-stained clothes and a mysterious package. In the comfortable home Charlotte had rebuilt after the war, they carefully examined each document by lamplight, Thomas taking meticulous notes for the historical record he planned to compile. The story of the Sutton brothers and their deadly whiskey deserved to be preserved accurately, a cautionary tale for future generations. What will you do with these? Thomas asked, indicating the original documents. Charlotte considered the question. Colonel Crawford suggested the War Department archives. They can be stored with the original cache, completing the historical record. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. And then, will you stay in Oak Ridge? It was a question he had asked before, especially since his marriage 2 years earlier had given Charlotte a daughter-in-law and recently a grandson in Philadelphia. The pull of family competed with her attachment to the community she had served for 15 years. I think perhaps it's time for a new chapter, Charlotte said slowly. The school is well established now. Miss Peterson is more than capable of taking over as headmistress. Thomas's expression brightened. You'll come to Philadelphia? James would love to have his grandmother nearby. For a time, Charlotte qualified, but I'd like to travel as well. There are places your father and I talked about seeing together, the Grand Canyon, Yellowstone, the Pacific Ocean. Then you shall see them, Thomas declared. I'll help make the arrangements. That night, after Thomas had retired to the guest room, Charlotte sat alone on the porch, much as she had on the night Elijah left for the Sutton cabin. The pocket watch that had survived that day rested in her palm, its steady ticking a tangible connection to the past. She thought of all that had transpired since that winter night in 1864, the terror of flight through snow-covered mountains, the years of rebuilding in Philadelphia, the return to Tennessee to honor Elijah's memory through service to the community he had protected. The journey had been longer and more difficult than she could have imagined, yet she had walked it with the same determination that had carried her through those first desperate days. "We did it, Elijah," she murmured to the night air. Justice was served. The truth was preserved. The story of the Sutton brothers' deadly whiskey would now take its place in history, not merely as a tale of horror and scientific abomination, but as testimony to the courage of ordinary people standing against extraordinary evil. Elisha and Deputy Wilkes, Jeremiah Winston and his son Caleb, and Charlotte herself, all had risked everything to prevent a weapon that would have brought untold suffering. In the peaceful Tennessee night, with the past finally laid to rest and the future opening before her, Charlotte Hobbs closed the pocket watch and rose from her chair. It was time to step forward into whatever adventures awaited in the years to come, carrying with her always the lessons of courage, justice, and resilience she had learned on these mountain paths. The cold case of the brothers whose whiskey sent strangers to the grave had reached its final chapter. But the echoes of those dark days in 1864 would continue to resonate through time, a reminder that even in humanity's darkest hours there would always be those willing to stand for what was right, no matter the cost.